Thank you, Morten, and welcome again to what I hope will be the most interesting panel discussion this afternoon, since this is the only Russian participant we have in today's seminar. I am Stig Fredrikson. I have been covering Soviet and Russian affairs for over 40 years by now, as a foreign correspondent, as a commentator, mainly for Swedish public television. And the last few years, I have also published a couple of books about Russia. The latest book, which is just out this spring, is based on a mail conversation that I had with Mikhail Khodorkovsky in prison. And it's called The Oligarch versus the President. And who the president is, you can guess yourselves. This panel discussion will be about Russia in the Baltic. And now we will try to hear or imagine what Russia's aims are, what Russia's ambitions are in the Baltic area. And of course, there is no one from the Russian government here. But Boris Nemtsov represents Russia today. But on the contrary, I mean, he's not the Russian government. He's the opposite. He's very much part of the democratic opposition in Russia today. The two panelists are Janis Kazocins from Latvia. Janis Kazocins has a long distinguished career in the British Army and ended up as a brigadier in the British Army. But for the last 10 years, Janis has been head of the Latvian intelligence agency, right? You're most welcome. And Boris Nemtsov became known as a prominent reformist governor in the Nizhny Novgorod area. He was picked up by Boris Yeltsin, became first vice premier, and some of you may remember, I hope you remember, that Nemtsov took part in Boris Yeltsin's famous trip to Sweden.
I remember.
1996.
I remember when his idea to marry me with Princess Victoria.
It's true.
Of course true.
Yes.
I made great mistake in my life.
And as I said today, Boris Nemtsov is a very prominent member of the Russian democratic opposition. He has taken part in all the protest marches, opposition meetings over the last 1.5 years, and you may have seen him lately during the first day of the trial against Navalny in the town of Kirov when Nemtsov was there. I will now ask you to give short introductions on this topic for 5-7 minutes, and I start with you, Janis.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you most sincerely for inviting me to take part in this most interesting conference. Russia and the Baltics. Well, I'll begin by saying I do not think that when President Putin gets up in the morning, the first thing he thinks about is the Baltic states. However, what I would like to do is compare and contrast two presidents. President Ahmadinejad said that he thought that Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. He then proceeded to develop nuclear weapons, and the world takes him very seriously. President Putin, in February, explained why the winter war of 39-40 against Finland was justified because it corrected a historic mistake, the mistake of the peace treaty which left the Finnish border too close to St. Petersburg. Therefore, it was justified to take military action to correct a mistake which had been made decades before. President Putin is also on record as saying the biggest mistake of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. He is now embarking on a massive rearmament program. I think we should take him seriously. I have got 3 points that I would like to make. First of all, the Russian Federation is still interested in the Baltic states and would like them to return or remain within Russia's zone of privileged interest. Secondly, the Russian Federation will use all 3, or maybe even you could say 4, foreign policy security and foreign policy instruments as appropriate to achieve these objectives, their various objectives, including this one. And here I mean hard power, economic power, soft power, and perhaps cyber power. And the third point is that soft power, contrary to expectations, might actually be effective in the CIS and Baltic states. First of all, why is Russia still interested in the Baltic states? Well, this is part of the aim of restoring great power status and is fundamental, which is fundamental to Russia's security and foreign policy. It is part of Russia's centuries-old paranoia, which Edward Lucas has described so ably recently. It is also a paranoia which is based on fact, because with the collapse of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, Russia has lost strategic depth in the West, and therefore Russia feels threatened. It is a historic xenophobia which actually suits the Kremlin very well for the time being. And we see it in influence operations which are conducted in the Baltic states. Political diplomatic pressure is put on the Baltic states, human rights violations, rewriting history. The promotion and popularization of Russian language, culture, history, sport, all add to this. Seeking influence on domestic, financial, economic, and political processes, both overtly and covertly, through bribery and all sorts of other underhand practices as well, is rife. But most of all, the use of the compatriots since 2006. The compatriots policy, which was introduced by President Putin, as he was then as well, is well coordinated, generously funded, seen to be legitimate at home, which is very important. It is long-term, but it is fundamentally false, because the Kremlin has no real interest in compatriots in the Baltic states, as can be seen with the treatment of compatriots in Central Asia, where other priorities are more important. But in Western Europe and the Baltic states in particular, compatriots play the same role as the communist parties of Western Europe did during the Cold War for the USSR. Now of the 3 or 4 instruments. Hard power dominates. This is a result of history, historical experience, thought processes which are developed during the period of the USSR, militarism, victory in war, state defense, and most of all now we see it in the priorities set for the budget. The dramatic rise in military spending. I won't go into details, but we're talking about over 1 decade to another, something like 1 to 7. And most important, this money is going to defense as opposed to where it really should be going, which is economic diversification and infrastructure support. Economic. We heard in the last discussion very clearly that the export of raw materials and weapons is fundamental and how it can be used. It also keeps the power vertical in place, and it provides up to now a level of social stability, but that is declining. But it is still a very important tool which can be used in the Baltic states. But as far as soft power is concerned, this is even more important. It is seen by the Kremlin as a threat to Russia, Russia's interests. Therefore, it must be used by Russia itself. Now, if Professor Joseph Nye talks about soft power as being the power of attraction, that is culture, political values, and foreign policy, then it is worth quoting, and I apologize for quoting at length, not that long, the Russian foreign policy concept of this year, 2013, which defines soft power as a comprehensive toolkit for achieving foreign policy objectives. At the same time, increasing global competition create a risk of destructive and unlawful use of soft power and human rights concepts to exert political pressure on sovereign states, interfere in their internal affairs, destabilize their political situation, manipulate public opinion, including under the pretext of financing cultural and human rights projects abroad. Absolutely. This is the paradox. NGOs in Russia are being persecuted because they're a danger. Gongos, government-organized NGOs, copyright Estonians, are being set up and used abroad specifically to do what it says here. Finally, soft power. May it be effective, and why should it be effective? Well, in Russia, the culture certainly is something that we all admire and is very powerful. But political values and foreign policy, largely unattractive except for some very odd countries like Venezuela and one or two others. As far as the EU is concerned, the EU offers prosperity, democracy, equal opportunity. The US, freedom, individualism, enterprise. China, an alternative economic model, work. Even the USSR offered the dream of social equality. But what can the Russian Federation offer today? Only things orientated in the past. Great victories of the Second World War. But these have a resonance in the CIS and the Baltic states to a certain degree, because there is the common USSR history. Russian compatriots form a substantial cohort in a number of countries. The state-controlled Russian media is all-pervasive and very influential. And Russian language, all of these things create a network of influence, added to which the promotion of Russian culture, history, and sport only add. But of course, all of these things together are, in the end, enforced friendship. And enforced friendship is unlikely to work in the long term. Or, as I think Margaret Thatcher has said, if you have to say that you're a lady, then you're not. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janis Kazocins, for your interesting observations. Boris Nemtsov, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for invitation. Fortunately, I do not represent Kremlin. I represent Russian democratic opposition. Well, let me start not maybe from military threat for Baltics, but to describe what's happening inside, because foreign policy of Putin is a continuation of his domestic goal and domestic policy. Well, he is in the office for 13 years, and his main goal is to keep power up to the end of his life and continue to steal money, property, not only for himself, but for his team, and others describe some his close friends, like brothers Rothenberg, like Timchenko, like others, with whom he raised billions and billions of dollars. That's why his goal is to keep power and to be rich, maybe the richest man in the world. It's the first point. Second, his popularity is going not very fast, but is going down. And public opinion polls show that he lost during the so-called elections in 2012. He lost more than 10%. People are very tired of him. Putin was a president of hope. Now this is not such kind of understanding. Well, people understand that one of the greatest results of Putin is huge corruption, even higher than in African countries, etc. That's why people are tired, and differences between rich and poor are very huge. That's why his concept now is to find enemies. First of all, to find enemies inside. I'm one of the biggest enemy. Not only me, fortunately, for example, Alexei Navalny, Garry Kasparov, Andrei Piantkovsky, Michael Kasyanov, who was prime minister in his first government, and others, and of course, foreign enemies. Foreign enemies, first of all, it's difficult to find friends around Russia, Putin Russia, maybe except Finland. Finland has the same position like in the Soviet Union time. Partner, not friend, but partner. As far as Sweden is concerned, I was sure that Putin believes that this is a friendly country, but looking at his last movie on Putin TV, and he described what's happened in the last rally in Bolotnaya Square, and for the first time in my life, the beginning of this rally was described when a Swedish spy appeared on the rally, and so-called Russian correspondent asked him a question. You are a Swedish spy, why you are here? What is your real goal? What is your real purpose to be here among Russian opposition leaders? And it was second secretary of Swedish embassy, very, very great guy. He said, well, I represent Swedish embassy. Maybe you ask this question to our ambassador. Well, I must just observe what's happening in your country. We like Russia, etc. But for the first time, Putin propaganda mentions Sweden like some threat, not huge, but some threat, which is very unusual for me and very strange, but it's happening. Well, enemies. Who is the biggest one? Of course, the United States. Number one, and anti-Americanism is a symbol of Putinism. Every day in every Putin media, you recognize that the biggest enemy of Russia, who want to destroy the country, who want to split Russia, who want to steal Russia, who want to kill Russia, is the United States. Baltics and Georgia, I think, are in the second place. Not because of huge power, huge military possibility, but because they are very close to the United States. And they are a great partner of the United States in this area. And the West. And the West, like a partner of the States, like a representative of human rights, freedom, democracy, etc. And Putin does not believe in all of these values. He believes just in money and power. It's very easy for him. And this is a main reason why there is so big misunderstanding between Putin and the rest of the world, because we have absolutely different values. He believes in money and power, and you believe nobody knows what. Freedom, democracy, human rights. Putin believes that this is trick. This is just blah, 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 blah. Where is money?
Can I just
and come back to his policy as far as military is concerned. I know that you are very much cautious about military exercises here in Kaliningradsky region. His new idea to build Air Force base in Belarus, etc. My understanding is that this is mainly imitation. I explain you why. You talked about rising of military budget. Russian military budget this year is 70 billion US dollars. This is 10 times less than the US military budget. And Putin knows that Baltic states are a member of NATO, and he knows about Article number 5. He knows that. That's why the main reason why he wants to show this is domestic reason. This is domestic. This is not, to start the war against Baltics. As far as soft power is concerned, I completely agree that he believed that soft power is more important, and he used such instrument like to support media in Baltic states, like to support maybe some activists in Baltic states, and that's true. But Baltics are a member of EU and member of NATO. I don't think that he really thinks, yes, he has paranoia, I agree, but not in a such unlimited level to believe that to repeat Molotov-Ribbentrop Act is what he can do. I don't think so. He can't.
I just wanted to ask you, because when you mentioned the Baltic states on second place after the United States.
Georgia
and the Baltic states.
Yeah.
Then, Janis, you may comment on it also. Is there a personal element on Putin's side in the animosity towards the Baltic states, especially Estonia, because Putin's father was betrayed by the Estonians. Putin's father's army unit was betrayed over to the Germans, and Putin's father was almost killed after that. And it seems as if Putin has a special animosity towards Estonia.
I think that he hates not only Estonians, but Latvians and Lithuanians.
The same.
Well, maybe if you look attentively on Baltic states, I agree with you that Estonia is in the first place. I believe Lithuania is in the second, and Latvia is in the third. I mean hate, right? Well, maybe you are right. Maybe his background and his father's story played some role. But I think that now his position based on understanding that all of these Baltic states are not even a member of European Union, are a part of the US interest. Not the European Union, US interest. And the same with Georgia, absolutely. As far as Georgia, I can tell you that personal point is absolutely crucial with Georgia because he hates Saakashvili personally because of some, special reasons. But he hates Saakashvili personally. That's why.
Putin.
Huh?
Lily Putin.
You are right. Well, Lily Putin. Well, never forget. Well, and I think that Georgia is a different case, but the same. The US has huge influence on Georgian domestic policy, and the US want to join Georgia to NATO, and he is afraid that Russia will be around NATO bases, etc.
Janis, would you like to comment on this personal element on Putin's side?
I think there's nothing I could add to what Boris has already said, but if I may, what I would like to do is use this as an opportunity to explain why at least part of our Russians hate Latvia and the Latvians, because if they are the ones who came in after the war, they are the ones whose husbands, fathers, brothers fell in the Great Patriotic War. They fought to free the Baltic states and the rest of Europe from Nazism. And now these bloody ungrateful Balts are making them second-rate citizens. And they will never understand this, that they are the ones who paid with their blood to bring freedom, and yet the Balts think that this is the real freedom, and they're rewriting history. So one has to understand that mindset, and that will only really go with the demise of this generation and a new generation coming along.
I'd like to come over to the Russian military build-up, the planned military build-up during the next decade. But you seem to play it down.
Well, first of all, he promised to spend about 20 trillion rubles, which is approximately 700 billion during upcoming 10 years, right? It means about 70 per year, that's what I mentioned. He knows better than me and you how much money disappeared because of corruption and because of desindustrialization of Russian military complex. That's why I don't think that, of course, this is huge amount of money, and this is against Russian interests to spend so much money for military purposes. Well, especially if you take into account that he has no ideas how to protect Russian interests with China. Nothing happened in China border at all. Demilitarization of China border has already happened. 200 miles of demilitarization zone has already existed. No new bases appeared. No population after Ural we have, just 20 million of people. On the other side of the border, the Chinese have more than 1 billion. Well, and the economy is much higher than Russian economy, but he has no ideas. As far as Western direction is concerned, he knows from Soviet time, it's easy and cheap. For example, to build one base in Belarus, this is nothing as far as budget is concerned. This is nothing. Well, that's why, and he understands how much money the US spent for that, and all NATO countries generally, he knows all of that. I don't think that he really believes that real war with the West can happen. I don't think so. And last point, which is absolutely important for corrupted system, his friends, for example, Timchenko, he's Finnish citizen, right? He has great villa in Geneva. He paid taxes not in Russia. Being the biggest exporter of oil, Russian oil, he paid taxes outside Russia. His daughters, you know, they are in Europe. Mm-hmm. How to start the war if you have accounts, kids, you know, friends in Europe? How? Again, he's not Stalin, right? He's a combination of Stalin and Abramovich. You know, this is absolutely different story. You know, Abramovich, he has, you know, Chelsea Club in London, he travel a lot in the south of France, and Putin looks like the same. Maybe richer, I don't know. But look like, that's why I don't think that he's thinking really how to fight against the West.
Janis,
but to show that we have an enemy and we are ready to protect our interests, he wants.
Mm-hmm. I think that I absolutely agree with Boris here. But what we do have to bear in mind is that even now, before this program is put in place, Russia is a regional superpower. Because on the other side, on our side, in the Baltic states, there is next to nothing. And if Russia is this year spending 4.4% of GDP on defense, okay, it may not be sustainable, but two of the Baltic states are spending less than 1%, well, what I would say is that I believe that Putin and the Kremlin are opportunists. And while for the foreseeable future, nothing is at all possible, if one postulates a possible breakup of the Eurozone and a collapse of the euro, which might well lead to a collapse of the European Union, and postulates something like the breakup of the North Korean regime, which will create massive instability in the Asia-Pacific region, then opportunities may arise, which if you have the forces and if you've exercised them, you can make a fait accompli and then see whether anyone wants to react.
But nevertheless, there is a military build-up on the Russian side. And where is it directed? In what direction? Is it to the south, to the Caucasus, to the Central Asia? We see more activity also in the Baltic area, but why?
This is imitation of enemy. Because, you know, Putin never started the war against Georgia and will be involved in this war. If Georgia will be a member of NATO, I'm 100% sure. He will be very much afraid of consequences. Baltics are members. How to start? What does it mean? To start the war with the states? He understands that absolutely. He knows Afghanistan problem, Iran problem, Syria problem, knows everything. But he knows that this area is under NATO participation. What should be done with that? That's why I don't think that he seriously thinks that for example, exercises in Kaliningrad region or build Air Force base. He wants to do it, to start something serious. As far as South, yes, he's thinking about Georgia, of course. Now he's very much cautious about withdrawal of American and NATO troops from Afghanistan. This is a very serious problem for Russia because of drug traffic, because of Talibs, and this is a threat for Russia. He knows that this is a serious threat for Russia. He knows that. That's why he get a lot of privileges for Tajikistan, for example, because Russia has a base, in Tajikistan, and for example, he proceed very unpopular policy concerning immigration of Tajiks. Do you know why? Because this is a press from Rahman. Rahman said, I am ready to give you base, but don't forget about our Tajiks in Moscow. You kill Tajiks, forget about base. That's why this is very unpopular policy because of xenophobia, etc. But Putin will proceed it because he knows that American will disappear. What's happened next?
But Janis, how much of an insurance policy is the NATO membership for the Baltic states? Will the United States go to war over the Baltics?
The Article 5 either stands or NATO falls. But could I return to what we were saying? I totally agree with Boris that if you are a Russian defense professional, and there are a lot of good defense professionals, then the defense of the Russian Federation is a nightmare. It is the biggest land mass country in the world, and huge borders, and a diminishing number of people who can be called into the armed forces, and this will continue up and beyond 2020. And therefore, you have to have strategic mobility, and that's why you concentrate on forces which are quickly able to be deployed, which can be deployed by air, by rail, and this has been exercised. And I would say, in all objectivity, that the Southern Military District is the top priority. The Central Military District is the second priority, not only because it's the strategic reserve, but also because this is with a view to what will happen in Afghanistan when NATO pulls out in 2014, which is another nightmare for Russia. And only then is the Western Military District priority. But that does not change the fact that if you have a capability there, and there may be no intention, and I agree, the intention can change in a flash if the capability is there.
Before I let in the audience, one final question. How would the present Russian leadership react to a Finnish or Swedish membership in NATO?
I think that he will be angry. But it doesn't matter. He will be angry every time about every subject. For example, I'm here, he is angry. You become a member of NATO, he will be angry. Baltics became, he was, completely disappointed, whatever. I don't know what kind of decision and when it's happened. Maybe he started campaign against Sweden to show this movie on Putin propaganda TV. I don't know, because he knows your real goal. Well, I don't know. But to explain Russian people, I explain what's the problem with Sweden. To explain Russian people that Sweden is an enemy is very difficult. Is very difficult because a dream of social democrats, a dream of Russian people that this is a country of middle class, that this is a country